that part of our mission and also our challenge is that we don't get distracted with all the things that entertain us. Where and give us the because we're spreaders, we're the water bearers. We like to spread the knowledge. That's our prime one of our primary attributes. And I like to know the generation I'm dealing with, so I know how to address them. Number two is I like to know their birthdays, so I know their astrological
Yeah.
influences. And if that and I'm comfortable asking people because they seem to never mind that I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I don't care. You can ask me whatever you want, man. I'm open to anything. I'm
Very good.
I enjoy doing this type of podcasting, I feel the same way, you gotta get the message out there somehow, and I feel like I've been yelling and screaming about things my entire life, so
Well, most of the time before we launch, just as a kind of background, I found that most of the time people that are well informed are good at describing the problem,
yes.
but they're not as competent, and I don't mean this as a criticism. They're not as competent or capable of the solution, which is why I had to when I realized that I was speaking with my then colleagues in the 90s, that I was way past where they were at. And I meant that not in a critical way, it's just that their toilet training had given them a a path that they was an unproductive is not a productive path in my mind. Oncology, obstetrics, all these different technical types of things. They they teach you in med school a particular mindset. And when I graduated, my dearest friend and colleague who's passed away, Dr. Am Rosen, told me that I was able to retain myself because they indoctrinate you. You're so heavily invested in that field that it changes you. And if you keep your morals, you'll be in a smaller category of doctors, right?
Yeah.
And and there's a great image that Norbert Hauser had, where it shows a pyramid and it shows 90, like 97 or something percent of the doctors, and then the very top 3% were great doctors. And
Yeah.
there's a yellow part there, about 5 or 6%, 7%, and the rest was all medical technocrats.
Yeah. I totally believe that. Like, since my injury, like, I've had a lot of really bad doctors, and it's kind of an eye-opening experience. I didn't realize that, like, the first doctor I had when I moved here was just a really bad doctor. He was not very smart, like, just a bad doctor. I don't even wanna, like, get into him too much, but, like, I remember sitting at home one day thinking, like, "This guy's an idiot. Like, how did I not I've been seeing this guy for 2 years, and he's been, like, dumb the entire." And I was just flabbergasted. I'm like, "This guy's a doctor, you know, he's supposedly one of the better doctors in the area, and he's an idiot." And it was so, like,
Overeducated idiot.
yes, very overeducated idiot, and, like, I know a lot of people like that, that have got a lot of education and not a lot of common sense, and it was just, like, so deflating, like, "Oh my god," like, "this guy is just out there," and then I had a
It
couple
wa
more do the same thing, and it was just like, "Holy crap," like, I didn't realize. So when COVID came around, I was already primed for, like, bad doctors. I wasn't one of these, like, as soon as COVID started
Or
happening.
naive.
Yes, like, as soon as COVID started happening, everybody was calling the doctors and the nurses heroes, and I was like, "Oh, that's not gonna last very long because I've been through the medical industry, and I know that these people are not, heroes, a lot of them, and this, like, hero worship is gonna go away really freaking quick as soon as people realize that these guys don't have their best interest at heart."
Well, you've got a unique perspective and because of that, it offers me some opportunity to go some places that I can't with others. So
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely. I'm
I'm
excited to talk to you about some of this
I'm
stuff because
available.
I do
And
have a background in medicine at this point because I've been dealing with it my whole life, and especially for the past 10 years, it's been a constant thing. You know, I've got 3 doctor's appointments tomorrow. It's like, ugh.
okay, well, then let's go in the direction you want me to go. I'll
Yeah,
be
well,
here.
let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you become, this renegade doctor? You called yourself a maverick, which I love it. Like, I said off air that we love mavericks, we love renegades on this show, and it's a great story. Me and you talked about it earlier a couple weeks ago on the telephone, but I'd love for
Yeah.
people to get your background.
Well, I thank you, and we're recording now?
Yep, I hit the recording button. Usually I do an intro. Yeah, what's going on? It's time for another episode of Too Hard for the Radio, transmitting from the future free state of Greater Idaho. I am the one armed madman. And with me today, we've got a first timer. It's Dr. Dean Lloyd. Everybody, give Dean a nice warm welcome. Yeah, exactly. I should have some, yeah,
Th thank
you get it.
thank you, it's
I have music, but I don't do music on the first episode with somebody new. I keep it a little lower, and then after on the second episode, you get the music.
okay. Well, thank you. It's, been, a very amazing trip for me in this field. I did when I was in med school, I went to Oriented Medical School. I did go to multiple different specialized classes. I pre-med. I've been through the gamut, if you will, of medical training in a way. But what I was most interested in was my injury. And I had it at 11 years old where my head hit the ice when I was skating. I used to be a little uh, hockey player that just couldn't get enough of, skating and being outdoors and so on. And my father was motivated to take me to hockey games, and I was raised in the Detroit area. And my father was a very unique man. He was a genius artist. He was a designer of cars. He was on the Ford Mustang team and designed cars. He was later taken
Cool.
as chief designer in Chrysler. And these were in the heyday,
Yeah, when
when
cars were cool, you know?
cars were cool,
Yeah.
right?
I've got a
We had
72 C10 short bed in my garage right now that's getting a new engine very soon.
beautiful.
Yeah.
There you go. And the less computerized, the more fun they are.
I will never buy a new vehicle in my entire life. I've never owned a new vehicle, and I never will because I'm not paying 100 grand for a pickup. Sorry.
There you go. No, and when you have that motivation to work on it yourself,
Yeah.
then there's that incentive to have an older car, of course,
And it makes
unless
you
you're
like,
really
I don't wanna get too far out on tangent, but it makes you feel good about the vehicle. The vehicle has a history, it has character. It's been around longer than me, and it will be around longer than me when I'm gone, and, like, it's something there's something to it. It has a soul almost, right?
well, that was my father's motivation, and I saw when I was growing up these incredible, pieces of art, and a lot of them were cars, and you'd draw them in the basement.
Yeah,
The first minivan was in our basement when Lee Iacocca was taking over, and, bef just all kinds of real cool history, so
yeah.
I'd observe him doing these beautiful paintings, and and he'd turn up his classical music, he'd have his, glass of wine there, and I that was normal to me to see art being formed. And so I when I tried it myself, he said, "Dean, you don't have it. You
At
just
least he
it
was
isn't
honest with you, right?
yeah, you just don't you're not gonna be this artist, and there you go." And I said, with my motivation of wanting to, because I was playing classical music, and I was the bassist, and I got up to first chair, and I proceeded on to doing many other things musically. But the bottom line is that I had this accident where I was experiencing such trauma, such pain that I was experiencing seizures later in life. It
Oh,
wasn't right after the accident, but it happened several years after. And I even have mark on the back of my head still, if you can see it.
Yeah, I
The
do.
bald spot,
Yeah, you
yeah.
got a bald spot there.
Yeah, well, that's what you get when you hit your 60s.
Yeah, right?
I'm in my 60s, so anyway, it makes it so that, when I have an experience like this and I have patients that come to me with trauma, there's a deeper connection because I know what I've been going through in some form of that kind of trauma, right?
Mm,
Physical trauma. So I had seizures in my 20s, and when I'd have my seizures, I experienced a very painful yet massive energy shift. And the way I describe it is that I would hear like 1,000 crickets in my head. It'd be buzzing, and my body would start to sweat. And I would see in the center of my eye, my with my eyes closed, my third eye, if you want to think
yeah.
of it that way, a light that started in a round circle, a round dot, and it grew into like an image of the sun. Okay, but this is all white. And then as the crickets got louder, the sound got louder, my head was just excruciating pain. I would go in, I couldn't stand,
Yeah.
obviously, I'm kneeling and I'm feeling like I'm gonna vomit and releasing all kinds of just pressure in my we have sutures, right, in the
Yeah.
skull. You have these little, pathways, right? And I was feeling shifts in my head,
Oh,
and as I was going through this, the light turned into a circle. It dissolved into a circle, and as it got into that circle, it then dissipated and was gone. As all of this was happening, pain, cricket sounding, light, and complete loss of my mobility. And when I came out of it, I was trying to catch my breath. And I was catching my breath, I had this tremendous release of tension. But there was something going on with my nervous system that I didn't understand at the time. And so I wanted to pursue this when I went into med school. And there's a lot of, things that went on before that, but to for the purpose of this interview, I'm just going to take it to that place where I worked two jobs, went to med school. I was able to get through with what you would consider a little bit of kicking and screaming on my part because I wasn't exactly happy with the way I was being trained.
yeah. Yeah. I could
So,
imagine.
but I did have to. I knew what I had to do to pass the boards and all the requirements and so forth. So, but I did end up conducting an experiment, and that was when I was reading in Chinese text. I was reading the Ling Shu and the Su Wen. These are Chinese medical texts, and I was reading these and found that there was a treatise or a part of the information that really rang true to me, and it was hard to understand because it talked about the lesser yu and the greater shang and the terms that were involved with sound. Okay,
Okay.
and these sounds didn't have any explanation to them. I, being the you know inquisitive mind that I have, with physics background, musicology background, or into medical background, and so on. These things were perking my interest to the point to where I became obsessed. So I conducted an experiment in school that was a Doppler meter used on pulse for changing changes in the pulse, and for objectivity, I had to change when I introduced the frequency that was a pure tone into the acupuncture points like lung 5, LI4, lung 1, the shoe points on the back. All these different names are, uh, these are points that we're using for different conditions. Okay. Like if you have a headache,
Yeah.
it's common,
Yeah, yeah.
to use a
No,
point that's
I
on
I
the
went
name.
through acupuncture on my arm a bunch, so I kinda get it. I'm not all the way into it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And there's a system to this that's very beautiful. It's a system where there are 12 meridians. And I discovered with the help of Fabien Mamon, who's a French researcher and also acupuncturist, uh, he and his wife, who's an American, we became acquainted, and we had the same lane of interest. And we found out, of course, that the 12 meridians were not arbitrary. There's 12 meridians, and there's also 12 chromatic notes. So I became wholeheartedly involved with figuring out what happened to me, how I was able to get through these traumas. Because what would happen is when I would go into a beginning of a seizure, I would focus on the sound that was being created in my skull,
Yeah.
crickets, and I would be able to stop myself from going into a grand mal seizure. And for
Interesting.
your listeners, a grand mal is the type where you're
Yeah.
flailing limbs you can't control. Petite mal is the kind where you are basically immobile and staring, or close their eyes. You're just out of it. And I had that kind of type of seizure. I never had the petite mal. I had the grand mal type. So in any case, the interest grew as I delved into this, because what started to occur to me is when I was reading this, I knew that when I was conducting this experiment, working with the frequencies that were mentioned originally in the Japanese research, I was going to get some change. I didn't know what it was, but it was all in my mind. I was going to get a change. And guess what happened?
Gotta
I
change.
had, I, yeah, there
You
you
gotta
go.
change.
I got this theory, right? A thesis. I created the environment for the tests to occur. I also use EKGs, EEGs later. But as far as the original testing, I used a Doppler meter. And for those that don't know what that is, uh, when you hear a train coming down the tracks, way down there, and they're tooting their horn, it goes right by you, right?
Yeah.
Doppler effect. That's the change in the wave pattern. Okay, goes from short to long. Okay,
Yep.
and you have things that, yeah. So anyway, I measured this, measured the pulse, and so I played the appropriate frequency, and I introduced it to the skin, transmitting through aqua conduction, which is through the blood. Your blood is mostly water, right? You're mostly water, and it went through the meridians, and it changed the pulse all right. But
Wow.
in most cases, it changed it in the wrong direction.
Oh, weird.
It went in the
That's
wrong.
weird.
Yeah, it went from, if you had an excess pulse, we call excess pulse.
But it is but you know you're moving in the right direction, even though it's the wrong direction, like, you're seeing something happen,
I
some
was
sort of
it
change,
was
right?
one of the most, yeah, exactly. It was in the wrong direction,
But you're like, "Ooh,
but
I got something here."
exactly. So here we are with this information that I've been fed, I studied, and here I am putting my, you know, application to these ideas, these theories, and I'm getting the opposite effect.
Now, how was
I
the reaction to this? I would imagine that your professors and the normal route that you go through in medical school, I could imagine this would have rubbed some people the wrong way.
Well, it was, fortunately, one of my instructors was listening to what I was saying.
Mhm.
In other words, I was saying, "Look, the lesser shang, greater you, and we've got all these frequencies right here in
Yeah.
text. They mean something, and here's what they mean." So I identified, because I had music background, music theory, musicology, musician, and when I discovered in the math, music is math, okay, and it's,
Einstein thought in music.
there you go. And I'm in that same lane, if you will, thinking in music.
Yeah,
And
I
but
think in English. He thought in music.
I see. Well, there you go. And but it didn't come to me that what I was using were notes that were incorrect. In fact, I was using,
Oh.
they were the wrong scale.
Oh,
It
that
was the
makes sense.
opposite, because all those that are familiar with music, we have one on a piano, you call what's called middle C.
Mhm.
And they were taking this information from the new scale, the scale, that modern scale,
Oh,
which
interesting.
440, A440, which has there's historical reasons why that goes back to Germany in the Second World War. Won't go into that now. But they were using a scale that was in a lower frequency, okay? More around the frequency of 432. And in that range, what we're talking about is we're two problems. One, we have the wrong scale and we have the wrong tonality. Okay, we're using a different frequency.
Yeah.
So I had to figure this all out.
That's
So
interesting.
I had to talk to Dr. Falkenhausen, Dr. Wong. I had all these people that I had, and they're mentioned in my book, that five people in the world, I would say, would have knowledge of what I was looking for.
Yeah. No,
And
and
I
that
got
makes
to
so
know
much
it
sense, man.
very well, two of them. And what I did is I was in California, and I went to UCLA. Did all kinds of research, but it went back to the archaeological dig that really made things clear for me of the Maquis dynasty in China. And they had an orchestra of instruments that were buried in water,
Oh, wow.
and it preserved all these instruments. So when these giant zung bells, okay, there were all kinds of instruments in there, but these what they're called zung bells, giant iron bells, and they're not like a bell like we know as a with a circular bottom. It was an eye-shaped bottom, so it
Oh,
had this
interesting.
cone shape, right? But it's the only bell in the world that creates two tones. Because you hit it strike point one, it creates a tonic, and strike point two creates a different tone, right? Go into
Interesting.
the minor third. And so what happened is that these bells were used in the orchestra for the emperor. And so the musician was the next most important person in his cabinet. You had the general, you have, the astrologer, the musician,
Yeah.
so on. So the musician was right next to the emperor. And he alone was to create harmony
Yeah.
in music for the culture. In fact, they would take their instruments and tune it to each season. There's 5 seasons in Chinese medicine,
Okay.
okay? Not 4, 5. Late summer is the added one,
Oh,
okay?
interesting.
Like our Indian summer,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
might
that makes sense.
yeah. So they had
They're
5,
using
and
it for
so
healing purposes, essentially.
exactly, and so there you have where I took off. I was reading these characters, but the characters were not new Chinese. They were old Chinese.
Oh,
So
so that's
I
why the
had to
frequencies were
convert
off. Yeah.
old Chinese characters into new Chinese characters, then into English.
Oh, wow. That's super
Eh,
cool, man. That's really cool. I was looking for an expert at one point for like a court case over my injury, and
mhm,
I got electrocuted by 14,400 volts. They called it a catastrophic unsurvivable injury. And there are very, very few people in this country or in the world altogether that study high voltage electrical injuries because so few people like live through them. You only get a couple people, per year that live through like a lightning strike or a electrical power line strike. And the guy who ended up being the best expert in the world wasn't a doctor. He was a mechanical engineer and an electrical engineer. He just
oh, wow,
understood electricity and he was able to apply what he knew about electricity to the human body and he figured it out. And like he was the man, he had his list was years long. You couldn't get him if you tried to be to be an expert in your court case. But I found that
right.
super interesting that it wasn't a doctor who was the head honcho on this stuff.
Well,
It was an
yeah, they
engineer.
that's
And that
why
kind of reminded me of what you were talking about because like sometimes you have to have an outside perspective to look at a problem in a different way. You know, I used to work on dirt bikes a lot as a kid and I'd get angry and I'd start throwing wrenches and stuff like that. And, my dad, just calm down, go take a break, listen to some music or something, and then come back and everything will just start falling into place. And typically that's what happened. You just kind of have to reset your brain, think about things from a different angle and kind of, react to it. But the problem with like mainstream medicine is they don't want people going out of the bounds of this tight little box that they want you to live within. I can imagine, anyways.
Right, and consider all the history that built up to this point is that it's fear-based.
Yes.
It's disease-based, not wellness-based. It's not about how to balance your body out. Now, the Chinese had a different perspective, okay? They were about creating balance, yin and yang, excess deficient, hot and
Mhm.
cold, and so on. So that I gravitated towards that, okay? So what happened after I realized that the characters on these bells, these old Chinese characters, were a key to what I was trying to figure out. And it turned out that the scale that they were using did not start on C, it was started on F. And F is the opposite of C.
God, I haven't read music in a very long time, so I did not pick that one up.
The fifth, okay? And the
It's
fifth
been
is between the octaves,
I think
okay?
since I was like 12 years old, I haven't been instrumental anymore, so I don't put those together anymore,
Well,
but I get what you're
there's
saying.
you get what I'm saying?
Yep,
Okay,
I
well,
absolutely get it. Yep.
okay, so there's this clock that is used called the Zhu clock, and it's a 24-hour clock, and it's separated into 12 sections every 2 hours. So gallbladder, for example, is from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Liver is 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. Okay, and so on. It goes around the
Yeah.
whole clock. Well, it starts at the bottom. So when I explain this to my co-author now, he's my co-author, John Parag, and he was listening to me. And when I started to tell him, look, I conducted this experiment and we got the opposite results. There's a reason. And the reason is because it was the wrong scale. And the scale that the Chinese used started on F. Then he paid attention to me. And what do you do when you are out of your league in a particular area? You go to people that are smarter than you in the area that you
Yep.
want to,
Ask for help.
find out about, right? So what does he do? He goes to his mother,
That's
and his mother is a teacher, and she's musical brilliant. She's a music teacher, and she looked at all my data, how I came to this conclusion, and she kept it for a week. And she goes back to John and says, "John," well, he goes, "All right, give it to me, mom.
mhm.
Is he a complete lunatic or is he a genius?" He goes, "Well, he's right. Everything he's saying makes sense." So he supported me while I did my research.
Wow. That's cool.
And while I did this, I had to get, some of the translations, and I had to get all the background, and he everything that he gave me. I mean, it took me over 7 years to put this all together. And they invited me to China. I was given a job opportunity if I wanted to work in China. I mean, a gringo like me,
Yeah.
and I did. But I went to talk about Accutone there, and I was offered a position in one of their hospitals, and they offered me a wife, any wife I wanted. But I said,
That's
you
a
know,
nice perk.
oh, American Chinese doctor, Chinese doctor, wife who make big
Yeah, big
splash.
money. Big money. Smart kids.
Yeah. So I was given um, a choice, and I decided to stay on to finish my research. So I finished it, and I ended up in 1999 writing my book. I started teaching a couple years earlier then, but I have a history where I was using the ancient knowledge and fine tuning it to modern application. So now we're at a place. I practice naturopathy. I'm obviously oriented to medicine. I do detox programs. I've been trained in ozone therapy, which is a biooxidative therapy. I've got a multidisciplines, homeopathy, and so forth. And I found that when I was working, that I couldn't fit in very well to any of the categories that were provided me. even in Oriental medicine. Although I love it, I very much admire the beauty because it's what we're talking about, Nick, is the healing art. And these are systems. Ayurvedic medicine, for example, they have the three doshas. Chinese medicine has five phases. Allopathic medicine has all their testing procedures. We have emergency medicine, that's where we excel. We're not very good at keeping people living longer and healthier. We save them in emergencies. That's what we're good at in allopathic medicine. But what I had to define is my own path and create the type of new paradigm so that we talk about what healing is truly about, and that is about becoming aware. Healing to me is about becoming conscious. And that's when Dr. Rosen and I, over 30 years ago, were embarking on the Evolving the Species project. And I have this project up online. And the interest that I have is bringing practitioners together that are interested in the advancement of the species, evolving, that are not using fear base as their primary use of a tool in the healing art. Okay. So, what I talk about is a variety of topics. I cover social application, for example, intimacy and the erotic impulse, the healing art, and others. So this is what Dr. Rosen and I had figured we needed to change the medical paradigm. And he had an unfortunate circumstance where he had some dental surgery that caused him an infection, and it led to a more serious situation where he got ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And for those that don't know what that is, it's a muscle disease.
Yes, Lou
It
Gehrig's
was
disease.
it was brought on by the dental treatment, a very, very rare situation because he was in his 70s and just cruising. But there was that one piece, and I took care of him. I'd fly back and forth to LA because he lived in LA, and back and forth. I had to go back to Colorado for over 4 years, and that was a very traumatic time. But I did over the time get and manage the Evolving the Species program. And so now you know what I'm about. I mean, I love, that there's people that are interested in the new paradigm. It's just that they have to be brought up to speed in terms of why they're thinking in the way that they're thinking. Because when you're thinking in terms of tests, and tests are not what I hang my hat on, they are very useful in a lot of cases, but it is not the primary way we see people. In fact, it's gone to the extreme where they're now turning doctors to over to AI,
I
artificial
was
intelligence.
that was just going through my head. That was gonna be one of my questions at
Yeah.
this point. Like, I feel like the pivot to AI is gonna make things even worse. Like, one of my key complaints with doctors over the past 10 years since I've been injured is they do prognostic through computer. They don't look you in the eyes. They're not really listening to what you're saying. They're taking notes and they're feeding it into the computer. I don't know what happens in the computer, if it's some model or whatever it is, but the computer gives them an answer. They ask, the computer if I can take this medication with this medication. It's like they've off-sourced their brain to the computer. And I've been saying for a long time that these, iPads, iPhones, to me, these are brain prosthetics. And I feel like they're offloading their brains to prosthetics at this point. And I really think that AI is going to make it worse. I saw a video yesterday of an AI model going over the X-rays of an older woman's lungs and finding pneumonia in just a couple of seconds and pointing it out and circling it. And the X-ray tech was like, "It took me years to figure out how to do that quickly." And this thing's
Here's
doing
the
it
strong
immediately.
point.
Yeah.
Now here's the weaponized version of it. It becomes where we rely on AI for the direction in where humanity goes. And humanity in health, there's what's called the X factor in health. That's the unknown.
Mm.
and we all have that. And the AI cannot it can predict things, it can take in data, it can take in information, take like you said, there's a useful diagnostic tool, and that's what science does. Science is used for measuring things. That's its primary purpose. But we are an evolving spiritual being, and because we have a unique ability to feel, that's where it becomes disconnected. AI, as advanced as it becomes, I don't care how much IQ. They talk about the one that we're using now is 150 IQ, and then the one that's being advanced is going like into the 1,000 range, or
Yeah,
1,400 or something.
maybe. I
Yeah.
look at these things as more of synthesizers than actual thinking machines. Like I
Well, they
you
process
know what I mean?
information fast.
Yeah,
Big.
they're
That's
synthesizing. I love this book called Blind Sight. The guy was a synthesizer, and his job was to take a bunch of data and crunch it down into a little bit of data, and then explain it in the shortest and easiest way possible. And I feel like that's kind of what it does. It takes this large pool of data, it narrows it down into the area that you're looking at exactly, and then it condenses that into a digestible form.
Yeah, it's a you're right on. It distills the information,
Mhm,
and it makes it so that there's a comprehensive, what you'd call, outline perhaps, or, just some kind of, brief narrative.
mhm.
But in any case, what I'm interested in is finding out how the mind works. Now, this was a lifelong mission for both Dr. Rosen and myself, and we met, which is astonishing. I met him back in I mean, 80s, the early, and it was like I went to came to him as a patient first, and I was working, uh, for a writer at the time, and I'm getting myself going through med school, ready in prep for that, and, when we connected, it was it's when you meet somebody that's so on your
Yep.
lane, your path, it's as if
Lightning in a
everything
bottle.
and you're even, butting heads, but there was such I had that experience where putting 2 minds together, and Dr. Rosen himself was the genius of geniuses, and he really knew his stuff. He was amazing, this man. So, we decided after I graduated to collaborate on projects together. And it developed into we did some radio shows together. One of them was before Alex Jones, with, Dr. Lorraine Hurley.
Hmm.
Yeah, and, that was called Uncommon Awareness, and we had the Evolving the Species on Friday, and, the 3 of us would be, talking about pertinent issues. Uh, Dr. Hurley was killed. She was, hit by a truck on her bicycle. Dr. Rosen was killed because of, a very freakish incident, and I'm the only one left. And now it's my, if you want to call it mission, or it's one of the most important things that motivate me is putting this information out there for everybody that wants to understand how the mind body connection works. Now, this is unattainable by most practitioners, but I will stand by it, and I'm putting myself out there. It's quite a commitment. But what I am offering is this unique insight into where we had been given tools that were insufficient for our being able to work out the emotional confusion that we're all suffering with, right? The feelings in motion, that's what an emotion is. And why would people be so drawn to the drug world right now? Because they're escaping, they're leaving pain. Pain is blocked energy. Blocked energy, that means physical, like you certainly know a lot about.
Oh, yeah.
I know, yeah, I know, I know a lot about it myself. And that plane, it comes in the emotional place, that's blocked energy. You end up having to create an environment that allows the healing to occur because all healing is not about force. And what are drugs primarily doing? forcing your body, right? Blood pressure medication,
Yep.
pain medication. There's a time and place for that. Absolutely. I'm not saying there isn't. Thyroid medication. But in any case, we have more important areas of interest when we're talking about our evolution as the human species. What I'm saying is healing is allowed, but you have to have the one thing that neither you nor I can give anybody, and that's the desire to know.
Mm.
I can't tell you how I had this motivation and how it came about that I was able to make connection with the beautiful people that I have, but they were so instrumental in terms of how this whole program was put together
Mhm.
that the Evolving the Species project is my life's work, and along with Accutone, and that we are frequency based. Everything that we talk about frequencies like 528 or 432 and so on.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a lot of bastardization out there. I'll just warn you that it's not. There's no panaceas. It doesn't work like that, right? We have to understand a lot of just as a kind of example. You know how an MRI works?
Uh-huh.
And it's got thousands of
Yep.
X-rays, right?
Yep,
But it reads
magnets
color.
and
Yeah, it reads color, right? And the color is calibrated by pure tone. It has to be calibrated somehow. Um, I'd have to check this with the manufacturer, but there was a time where someone had told me that it was tuned by a tuning fork,
Oh,
by a
interesting.
pure tone. Yeah, but I don't know. I can't confirm that, but
Huh,
that was what I was told.
that's interesting.
And
You know,
yeah, but
the
but
the
we're talking.
frequency thing really rings true to me because, like, when I'm looking at, like, what happened to me, I'm sitting in the hospital, I'm like, "Man, like, I shouldn't have survived what just happened," and kind of, like, thinking about it in a deeper way, and it's like, every cell in my body, every brain, electrical signal, these are all chemical electrical signal based, you've got you've got electrons in every atom in your body, and these things are all, governed by electromagnetism and frequency, and it's like that energy was at one frequency going through the line. It's at 60 hertz, and then my body is at a completely different frequency. And these things are coming together, and you're going to have this interference pattern.
It's
And
not natural frequency, I might add.
yes, and I remember asking a doctor about that. I said, What do you think about, like, frequencies? Like, what could this have done to me on a deeper level, on the cellular level or the atomic level type of thing?" And they just go, your head's in the clouds. You don't need to think about that type of stuff." And it's like, well,
Because you
maybe I
scare
do. Like, it seems like
them.
there's something to this. Like, I know I'm not a doctor, but I know a lot about electricity and energy. And, like, to me, it seems like there should be something to that. And it shouldn't be something that's just hand waved away.
Very good. And you were intuitive about this, and I will say that is one of my favorite words. Intuition comes from the word in tune.
Hmm.
Okay. And we are uniquely designed with our own individuality. No one has the same thumb or fingerprint, right? They're all different.
Mhm.
We have our own unique identity, if you will, right? And because we understand that there's frequencies that have purpose, right? We have Wi-Fi. I mean, you have 2G and 5G. I mean,
Mhm.
those are waveforms,
Mhm.
right? And they travel with information on them, right? Well, your brain has waveforms that travel, with these information. You have when you go to sleep, for example, theta A, theta B, delta frequencies. These are all frequencies that change brain pattern because of your conscious state, right?
Yeah.
So when I pursued this work here, Nick, and it was one that I felt had to fill in the holes with so many gaps in understanding what was going on with me in my injury. And I did overcome a traumatic injury that could have kept me disabled my whole life.
Yeah.
and it didn't. And the same went for you. And because you had this intuition in tune, right? There was a consciousness that you were able to connect with. And it was my job, in my mind anyway, at the time.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I was banging my head in the wall trying to figure this out. But I am literally handing to you what the ancient knowledge of these frequencies has offered us and a way to apply it with the most important piece being aware and conscious. And that is the Evolving the Species project.
Churches and cathedrals,
Absolutely.
pyramids, all of these ancient structures that they built were all based on frequency. If you go to Chichen Itza and you clap your hands in front of the pyramids, it sounds like a bird is coming back at you. If you put the right amount of energy into some of these old cathedrals, some of these old churches, you get incredible sound. These massive organs, all of these things were designed to have a medical and like a happiness effect on the human being. We didn't even know, like, imagine Chichen Itza, you've got these pyramids. We can see a couple people standing out there clapping and it's making noise. What happens when you put 100,000 people all chanting and clapping and cheering the same thing, the same, rhythm or whatever they've been doing for thousands of years? They knew exactly how to activate these things where we can't even explain it.
You bring up a very important part of our healing. I'm glad you pointed this out. Yes, you are correct. These cathedrals did have a sacred geometric design that allowed sound to be amplified, focused, and they were using it in a way that caused the spirit to feel elevated. Or if you want to think of it, there's the negative side to it was that the church did not want to go outside their particular scale,
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah, no, that
Sort
makes
of
sense. Stay in our box.
stay in our box,
Yeah.
right, right.
Under
Because
our
if
thumb.
that harmonic minor for those that are musically informed is too seductive, a scale to play in the church. We can't have that.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
think of the children, Nancy Reagan.
yeah, right, right. This is a G-rated,
Yeah, this is a G-rated
event, right?
church, you know?
Uh, and listen to
Don't
the
learn how
music.
to read, just look at the pictures, you know? Like, I that's another thing about churches is, like, they were designed for people to be able to kind of, like, understand the gospel through
Mm.
imagery because they didn't want these people learning how to read, because once you learn how to read, now you're a weapon.
Therein lies too uh, the way that the Chinese thought of music was that their culture would evolve around music. In other words, if you had beautiful harmonies and you were resonating your music with nature, right? And you have these birds and you have the beautiful surrounding. You're dealing with uh, a harmonious, happy family, or the culture is you're getting good crops. Okay,
Yeah.
they have good. The weather isn't going to destroy them. In other words, they thought in terms of being in harmony with nature. That was their perspective, okay? And they did the right there, and their medicine was formed around a musical scale. Imagine that. And that they took these energy areas of focus, like I4, which is right here. Okay, that's a very common one people know about
Uh-huh.
for headaches, but it opens the gate. What it means, translate. And these points that were energy centers and they focused energy. Well, I was the one that, if you will, added to their knowledge base. And Fabian, I must give him credit for his work in doing this as well, because we did it about the same time, about discovering that these meridians had frequency, these points had frequency. I took it steps further and finding out that all the organs, levels of tissue, and of course, when we're talking about the delivery of these frequencies, they all have specific frequency they resonate best to in harmony with nature. because if you look at the harmonics in my book, I talk about that. The original scale was built on a pitch pipe before Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras created the mathematical equation to create what? The chromatic scale, right? That was 100 years after the Chinese had figured out that there was a relationship with these measurements that were sacred geometric measurements. Now, how does now this is my work, okay? So I can talk to that, but for the purposes of our discussion, I thought it might just be appropriate to give one visualization in my book that shows the pitch pipes. And you'll see that they're one third apart.
Okay, yeah, I see them.
Okay. So the first pitch pipe is 81 Fen. 81, 8 plus 1 is 9. Okay. That's a sacred geometric number.
Okay.
The next one is 108. And for those that know about chanting, like this, we were doing chanting just yesterday uh, when uh, the Hindus do the chanting of 108 times. Okay, that's 1 plus 8. That's 9. Okay, there's a sacred geometric relationship. There's the magic square,
Yeah.
which is 9 squares. Okay, and there's a relationship to that. Well, these all these positions also are musical. There's a musical relationship to that. But more to the point, I realized that this sacred geometric relationship of pitch pipes and sound was resonating in our body perfectly.
Oh, wow. How do you measure something like that?
I am glad you asked. Okay, their whole Chinese medical system was built off this scale.
Oh, okay.
So you have 5 tones, which are 5 phases, which are all the sharps on the piano. I have a piano behind me. Anyway, so the 5 frequencies, the 5 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, A sharp, D sharp, all 5 sharps are the foundation of the 5 tones in the 5 notes in the pentatonic scale, which is the 5 seasons, which all the
Oh,
organs
wow.
are run by.
It's all connected.
Ev Everything's connected. And then when you leave that scale, that 5 scale, you go into the 7 notes, and the 7 notes make up the all the whole notes in the scale. Bring them together, you get the 12 meridians, all 12 notes.
Our ancestors were so much smarter than we give them credit for.
They are,
You
and
know,
I had
like, there's it's every once in a while, you just hear something like that, and you go, "Man, how do these people figure this stuff out?" You know, and one of the things, like, I'm really into, like, Graham Hancock and this Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and how long people have been in the Americas, and, there's this site that they found in New Mexico where people were living with megafauna for thousands and thousands of years, and you go, "Yeah, duh." Like, these people weren't stupid. They didn't just show up on a continent they'd never been to before and then hunt everything to extinction within a couple of years. Like, they knew how to live with nature. These people were smart. Like, they had things figured out and stuff like that, man. It's, you know, and you could go to a hospital and they'll use sound to do certain things. You got a kidney stone? Great. We'll hook a speaker up here and we'll nail you with some frequency and break that thing up or we'll take a picture of your baby. But then you start talking like you're talking like we can use these frequencies not only to destroy things but to make things better. Then they go, "Oh, that's just woo-woo bull crap. Get out of here with that."
well, we consider their toilet training. We have to be compassionate for people that are really doing their best, and that they are using these frequencies in a very physical way, and oftentimes crude way, but it's physical, right? Because their mindset
Yeah,
is all
they're
physical.
using it like a blunt instrument to blow things up, destroy
Yeah.
things. Like
Or
it's
measure things which there has their place,
okay.
you know?
I didn't know about that. So that's good to know that they actually do use it
Well,
for some good.
that's what the MRI. I mean, you're
Oh,
measuring
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
you're looking at color as a frequency in the terahertz range, and I have on one of the pages of my book, the range of the frequency of, take F, for example. It's red violet, okay? Where you get into F sharp, then you go into the visible F range in the terahertz frequency, okay? So the relation, you might have to multiply it 40 times, 40 octaves higher to get into the for the
Gotcha.
higher range.
So is there
So what
like
we're
go ahead, sorry.
go ahead. No,
I
please
was
ask your
wondering, like,
question.
is there a way can people just hook up a speaker in their room and have some sort of like frequency that meshes with them or can is there easy fixes for people to like use speakers or modern technology to actually like improve their lives with little, money or cost or
Okay.
research?
That I will reserve for the next show
Perfect,
because
because that's probably
it
a long question, and I looked down at the time as
is
I
a
was asking
big
that, and I go,
question.
That's a little much. I should probably cool it on that."
Well, it comes, I'll give you a little hors d'oeuvre, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the one of the areas in my book I mention is that I tune the room before treatment.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, I tune the room, and I tune it to the frequency of the season.
Oh,
So here we are in
yeah.
spring, A sharp is the frequency, and you have a range, right? You have a tight range. But when you play a tuning fork and you have the exact same tuning fork right next to it, you strike the first one, the second one will start to ring.
Yeah.
Okay. That's called sympathetic resonance, right? Our bodies work like that.
Yeah, like me next to the power line. I wasn't getting sympathetic resonance, but I was getting some sort of resonance, right?
Yeah. Well, it was disrupting your energy field in a way where the cells couldn't communicate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
your
that's the way
your
I
heart
looked at
stopped.
it is that everything is connected through electricity and you got these different fields that are meeting together and you get interference patterns.
Right. And my particular lane was the healing art in finding out how I would get past this trauma that could take me out.
Yeah, I
You
totally relate to that. Like,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, how many people have a thought that are in your medical field, right? We're talking about the doctors you've seen, would be open enough to listen to you and say, in order for me to heal and use you as a help, you guide me, do you understand how I see myself? Do
mm,
you understand where I am coming from? And the doctor that listens to you, now that's where you enter into healing because the
yeah,
doctors now, like we were mentioning before, how they become so disconnected that they can't be able to either diagnose or treat you unless they have tests.
mm,
They may get a superficial analysis or assessment based on what your symptoms are, but that's not deep enough for me.
yeah,
That's just my perspective. It's good for little things like,
yeah,
"Oh, I got a little tennis elbow here
yeah,
or something. Please help me with that." "Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. But I
yeah.
feel better."
You know,
But your Go ahead,
I,
please.
I was gonna say I went through I had a drug problem when I was younger, and I ended up going through like it wasn't a rehab, but it was like an outpatient therapy type of thing where you
Mhm.
had different, counselors and different people that were teaching different classes. And these were like they're not doctors or nurses, but they're something. I don't remember exactly what their titles were. But the people who had no experience with drugs or alcohol themselves you just didn't relate to them in the same way as the people that had. There was a mixture of some of the people had no experience, just schooling, and other people had experience plus schooling. And the guys with experience, you just felt different around them because that they understand what you're going through. And I feel like it fostered a better environment for healing.
I call it experiential vibration,
Hmm, I like
and
that.
you thank you.
That's a great
And
show title.
yeah, because what you're talking about is your frequency, your consciousness is essentially who you are. Your being. This goes back into, the ancient Hindu teachings, Taoism. I can go on and on. I studied, Nick, all forms of religion to find out where they were coming from. I wanted to know what the Hindus were, what their perspective is. Why did they, what were all these gods representing, right? Or, what's the Confucius, you know, idea? What is his governmental idea? How to organize people? The Taoist, the way,
Mhm.
the way, okay, and so on, and and Christianity, and how did the Jews perceive themselves? The Judaic religions and the Abraham religions. I studied these because it was most important for me to understand where these systems, as they are, were directing humanity. And I came up with the conclusion that the only religion is, I'll cut it down to 2 words: paying attention. And life is essentially the only religion in your experiences. And that it brings you to a point to where you can respond with knowing, "Oh, hey, I remember how that worked, oh,
Yeah.
my boss was chewing me out, and, I gotta be if I'm gonna work here, I better not make him, or her pissed off," right?
Yeah.
So, you are getting feedback constantly in life, okay? And that feedback loop gives you the opportunity to be what I call free of mind or freedom of mind, because people are just out there just talking and talking about how, we have to change the government to be free. And yeah, well,
Yeah, good luck with
so
that.
there's a lot to be covered in that. Ask
Yeah.
ask Michael Storm.
Yeah, no,
He'll give you a new.
I'm the same way. A lot of these guys live in Ancapistan, and it's just like, "Dude, we don't live there. We're never gonna live there in our lifetime, so just get out of that frame of mind and live in the actual fucking world that we're living in right now, not the world you want to be living in." Doesn't work
Yeah,
that
well,
way.
and I found that too in many of the women that I've dated. I found that there's a kind of, well, you may be who you are, but I want you to be who I want you to be.
Yeah,
And I'm not criticizing the women. What I'm saying is that they have a perception of how the man should look. I had this one woman that I dated for a while, and she says, "Why don't you be like a regular doctor and work up here in Colorado Springs, and you could have hundreds of patients." And I was seeing a lot of patients at one
yeah,
time in my life, over 20 patients a day kind of thing, and that to me, it's not about the quantity. And Dr. Houston, for example, sees 80 some patients a day in this cardiac facility in Tennessee. Um, and I've been there, and there's different lanes where you can see patients, a lot of them, sometimes and help them great ways. But I had to figure out for myself that if I'm going to work in a particular area, what's it going to look like? And guess what? I couldn't find any. I
yep,
couldn't find any for the lane that I wanted. And that was this evolving the species project. It was consciousness. It was about realizing that the body works off of your feelings, right? It works off your feelings. Feelings are programmed. They're not logical, reasonable, rational. They don't make sense. They're programmed into us. We have our physical responses, and I go through these levels of the feeling body, right? And the the first 3 levels of consciousness. That's discussed, and that's what I want for the masses, if you will, to understand that there's an understanding of you don't have to be locked in to this mindset. You can reprogram, and Michael and I have talked about this, reprogram yourself to adapt to the situation that's more adequate, appropriate, and satisfying for your life. And as you have adapted, we'll give you kudos for that, right? We'll give you
yeah.
credit for making the advances that you are, but you're not done yet. You got work to do, and so do I.
Hey,
And
that stuff sounds easy, but I can tell you from experience as my brain was being rewired after electrical, trauma, it's not easy.
oh, it is,
It's
it is, it
very
is,
difficult.
and I can tell you too that it is, and it put me to the brink at many times.
As me as well. It's It's something that sounds so easy. Just change the way you think. Just change the way you react. Just change who you are. But it doesn't work that way. Like we still have a monkey brain going on in there that wants to do monkey
Well,
things every once in a while. And as it's rewiring itself, you don't really have control of what's going on. You might think you do. There's an illusion of control, but there's some of it that, let let Jesus take the wheel type of thing.
and I would say that what you're referring to is integration.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you had to have time. Maybe it would take 2 weeks for me to fully integrate a new state of mind that I had to adjust to, that I was so convinced that I knew how it worked. And then I was shown something that said, "Oh, uh-oh, here's better information. I gotta pay attention to this," you know? And, that that means that you realized probably early on that the monkey brain you just mentioned, the body's the dumb animal,
yeah, yeah.
and the dumb animal needs a good master.
The elephant and the rider, right?
Right.
All
So
right.
so, so if you use we all need a wholesome discipline. Okay? It'd be hiking, swimming, meditating, tai chi, qigong, uh, taekwondo, aikido. I've done all of these things. I've mastered what I've mastered, and what I now am able to offer is how, because there's nowhere on this scale I won't find you. Nowhere on this position, on this great big wheel, that I won't say, okay, let's make this. And we just did 3 shows on being tools psychologically infallible. And if you want to provide that to your listeners, the links to that, you're welcome to do so.
Absolutely.
And so what we discussed is how we were programmed. And what is most interesting to those that are really wanting to know how this works is to understand how we got programmed in the first place.
Yeah,
How do you get 5 women lined up looking at a naked man, and they get 5 different responses. "Oh, I don't like that guy because he looks like my brother." "Oh, that guy's a really attractive guy. I like his hair on his chest," you know? Or, "I don't like that guy. Someone put some clothes on him," right? Or, "That guy is one of those guys that need to be put on a sculpture.
yeah.
He's got a beautiful body."
And hey,
Or, "That guy
you could
my
also be the
husband, and I
you could
can't
also be the woman that
stand him."
goes, "I want that guy because he's a lot like my father." And then they get married and have
Yeah,
children, and she goes off of birth
right.
control, and then she's no longer attracted to that man anymore because that's not what she wanted when she was programmed. That birth control will program you to want something different than you actually want, and it's a great example of, like, programming that you don't even know is happening. Your brain is being programmed based on this medication that you're taking that's totally screwing with your body.
Oh, for sure. And your father image with the women that need to heal from that
Trauma.
kind of trauma is huge in our culture. It's huge, and it takes on many different forms. And it's my position that we don't we're not here to pick on anybody. I'm here to make you aware, and that's my job, to make sense. And when I can do that, then we have an opportunity. And it's up to you. If you have the desire to learn, I'll provide you the tools to get you out of the mess that you're in. Because we're so oriented to self-destruct, right? We have that sabotage mechanism that's built into us, that when we get too happy or too energized or too satisfied, there's that program that says, "Oh, you can't feel like that.
Yeah.
You can't enjoy your life." It's like when you're raised in a life that says, "Yeah, you do what you want. You're an American, but don't you dare enjoy yourself."
Yeah, you dirty American. No fun for you. All right. Doc,
Yeah,
I think we can get out of here on that. I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you still. So I
perfect.
really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Excellent. Thank you. Enjoyed it.